Christmas Eve, 1883. I lit one candle and set one plate on my small table. The same ritual I'd followed for 3 years. Ever since I'd left Philadelphia with nothing but my nurse's bag and a reputation in ruins. My clinic sat between Fort Benton and Helena, 500 miles of Montana territory, with me as the only trained nurse. 4 beds lined the east wall. Basic supplies filled the cabinet. A wood stove kept the winter at bay. Barely. The nearest doctor was 2 days' ride in good weather. In December. Good weather was a memory. I'd chosen this isolation deliberately. Out here, no one knew my name or what I'd lost. No one asked questions I couldn't answer. No one expected more than competence. And competence I could deliver. I was good at my work. Setting bones, delivering babies. Treating fevers and wounds and all the small disasters that befell people trying to survive in unforgiving country. What I wasn't good at anymore was trust. Some women came west for adventure. Some for love. I came to disappear, to prove I could manage alone. Needed no one's approval or partnership. After 3 years, I'd almost convinced myself it was enough. I checked my supplies that Christmas Eve, mentally cataloging what I had: laudanum, carbolic acid, cotton bandages, catgut for stitches, enough for the usual emergencies. A rancher's broken leg, a difficult childbirth, a child's fever that wouldn't break. I'd handled all of those alone in the past month. The town respected my skill even if they found me cold. I didn't attend socials, didn't linger for conversation after treating patients. I ate alone, slept in the clinic's back room, hadn't celebrated a holiday since leaving Philadelphia. I'd learned that, depending on any one doctor, colleague, man only led to disappointment. My single plate sat on the table, 1 cup beside it, 1 chair. The empty hooks on the wall where another coat might hang mocked my solitude, so I'd stopped looking at them. Winter pressed against the windows, and inside, the silence was complete. I'd learned to prefer silence. It didn't lie or betray. It didn't blame you for failures that weren't yours, or destroy your reputation to preserve its own. Silence was safe. The surgery had failed. The doctor had blamed me. The board had believed him. That was all anyone needed to know about why I'd left Philadelphia. That was all I let myself remember on most days. At 6 o'clock, I heard the explosion. The sound rolled across the prairie like thunder, but the sky was clear. I knew immediately the westbound passenger train. My stomach dropped. I started calculating supplies, beds, distances. The train carried 60, maybe 70 people. If it had derailed, I was already moving, grabbing my bag, pulling on my coat. My hands shook as I lit the lanterns. I heard the wagons before I saw them. The sound of suffering carries far in winter air, and I'd heard that sound before. Philadelphia. The surgery. The patient bleeding out while Dr. Morrison shouted orders, and I tried to staunch wounds my hands couldn't reach. I shoved the memory down and opened the door I'd kept locked for 3 years. I had no idea I was about to let in more than just patients. They came in wagons, on horseback, some staggering on foot. 60 injured people flooding the frozen street in front of my clinic, broken bones jutting through skin, burns from the engine fire, children screaming, blood darkening the snow. I went into the street and started triaging. This one first compound fracture. Risk of infection. That one can wait superficial cuts. Shock, but stable. This one. I looked at the elderly woman's crushed chest and knew I couldn't help her. 4 beds, 60 people. The mathematics of disaster. Mary, my teenage assistant, was crying. I don't know what to do. Miss Thornton, there's too many. Start with bandages, I said, forcing my voice steady. Clean wounds, keep them warm. But my own hands were shaking. I couldn't do this alone. I'd managed alone for 3 years. But this A man stepped forward from the crowd of injured. Blood ran from a gash on his temple, and soot blackened his clothes, but he carried a medical bag. His voice was calm despite the chaos. "I'm Dr. Garrett Hayes. Tell me where you need me." Every instinct I'd cultivated for 3 years screamed at me to refuse. I didn't need help. Didn't trust doctors. Didn't depend on anyone, especially men with surgeons' hands and confident voices. But a child was screaming, and pride seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. "The compound fractures." I heard myself say, "Start there." He didn't ask permission or question my authority. He just knelt beside a young boy whose leg bent at an impossible angle and got to work. I watched his hands steady, gentle, skilled. He asked the child's name, explained what he was doing in a voice that calmed fear, set the bone more cleanly than I could have managed. Everything I'd learned to distrust in doctors seemed absent in him, which made me distrust him more. We worked through the night in an unspoken rhythm I didn't understand. I handed him instruments before he asked. He anticipated what I needed before I reached for it. We'd never met, but our hands knew this dance. I noticed things against my will. The way he asked permission before touching a woman's injury, the gentleness in his hands with frightened children, his quiet competence that didn't demand acknowledgement, the old scars on his fingers, surgeons' hands that had seen failure too. Dr. Morrison had had hands like that. He'd use them to save patients and destroy careers with equal precision. "Carbolic acid," Dr. Hayes said quietly, and I passed it without thinking. "The child's fever is spiking," I said, and he was already moving to check. I hated how easy it felt. Hated that I'd forgotten what partnership looked like in a medical crisis. Hated more that some part of me had missed this, working alongside someone who understood the weight of holding lives in your hands by midnight. We'd stabilized 40 patients. 20 needed ongoing care. The clinic, the church, the hotel, all full of broken people who would die without constant attention. And Dr. Hayes was swaying on his feet, blood from his own head wound seeping through the bandage he'd clearly forgotten about. "You're injured," I said. Later. He kept working. Damn him for making it so hard to hate him. At 2 a.m, Mrs. Peterson went into labor. I delivered hundreds of babies in 3 years. I could manage this, except the baby was breech, and Mrs. Peterson was hemorrhaging, and my hands couldn't reach far enough to turn the child. I tried once, twice. My fingers slipping in blood while the mother's pulse weakened under my other hand. I was going to lose them both. The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. I had to physically force them out. "Dr. Hayes, I need..." He was already beside me, reading my face. "Tell me what you need." Not taking over. Not assuming I was incompetent. Just asking. As if my opinion mattered. As if I was a colleague. Not a subordinate. "The baby's breech. I can't turn it alone. Talk me through it," he said. "Your knowledge. My hands where yours can't reach." We worked together in the dim lamplight. My instructions. His fingers following them precisely. Our breath synchronized. When the baby finally slipped free and cried alive. Impossibly alive, I felt something crack inside my chest. Mrs. Peterson wept with relief. Dr. Hayes looked at me with something like respect. "You saved them." "We saved them," I corrected before I could stop myself. The words hung between us. An admission I hadn't meant to make. Partnership, not weakness. Something else entirely. Dawn broke gray and cold. 40 patients needed ongoing care. Surgeries to perform, infections to prevent. wounds to clean and redress daily. I looked at Dr. Hayes, exhausted, injured, still standing through sheer will. Looked at Mary crying in the corner, overwhelmed. Looked at my 4-bed clinic and the impossible task ahead. Stay. I heard myself say, the word tasted like surrender. 2 weeks, until they're stable enough to transport or send home. It wasn't trust, just necessity, practical logic. I needed help. And he was competent. That was all. I told myself that was all it was. 2 weeks. He agreed. I watched him sink into a chair by the stove. Bone-tired. Watched him close his eyes, blood-stained and spent. Something in my chest loosened. I grabbed a blanket and covered him before I could question the impulse. Just practical. I told myself. I needed him functional for the work ahead. The lie sat heavy on my tongue, tasting like all the other lies I'd been telling myself for 3 years. Lies about what I needed, what I wanted, what I was running from. He fell asleep, humming under his breath some tune I didn't recognize. When had I last heard music in this clinic? When had I last wanted to? 2 weeks felt safe. Temporary? I could manage anything temporary. It was permanence that destroyed you. It was trust that betrayed. It was partnership that blamed you for failures and left you alone to bear the consequences. I knew all of that. Believed it down to my bones. So why did watching him sleep feel like coming home? Day 3. And we'd found a rhythm I didn't understand, but couldn't deny. Morning rounds together. I changed dressings while he checked surgical sites. Our movements synchronized without discussion, him stepping left as I moved right. My hand passing instruments before he reached for them. We didn't need words. A glance, a gesture. And we moved like water around each other. I tried to keep conversations clinical. The rancher in bed, too, needs his splint adjusted. Mrs. Chen's fever broke. I didn't ask about his past. Didn't share mine. Kept the walls firmly in place. But small kindnesses kept slipping through my defenses. Coffee appeared beside me without asking. Exactly how I liked it strong enough to strip paint. No sugar. When I hadn't eaten in 8 hours, a plate materialized at my elbow. Bread and cheese, simple but nourishing. He took the night shift so I could sleep more than 3 hours straight. Never mentioned it. Never asked for thanks. I cataloged each kindness suspiciously. What did he want? Men didn't give without expecting something back. They didn't partner without eventually demanding credit or shifting blame. "You two been married long?" old Mrs. Henderson asked on day 5, watching us work. "Move together like you've been doing it for years." I froze. Defensive words rising automatically. "We're not just good colleagues, ma'am," Dr. Hayes said smoothly, his tone warm but clear. He didn't look uncomfortable, didn't make it awkward, just deflected with kindness. That easy grace unsettled me more than awkwardness would have. It suggested practice, comfort with himself, the kind of quiet confidence I'd lost in Philadelphia. I found myself listening for his footsteps throughout the day, knowing them from Mary's lighter tread, from Patient's shuffling steps. When had his presence become familiar? When had I started expecting it? Missing it when he stepped outside against every instinct of self-preservation. I noticed him. Really noticed. The way he crouched to a child's level to explain a splint, making the little girl giggle despite her pain. How he asked elderly patients about their lives. Not just their symptoms, learning Mrs. Henderson had been a school teacher, that the rancher had fought at Shiloh. The careful way he cleaned instruments after using them, methodical and thorough. I noticed his hands were scarred. Old scars, healed white against tanned skin. Surgeons' hands that had seen failure too. The observation sat uncomfortably in my mind. What failures had brought him west late one evening? Most patients sleeping, he asked quietly. Why did you come west? I could have deflected. Should have. Instead, I heard myself answer. I needed to prove I could manage without anyone's approval. The truth, but only the surface of it. The wound beneath remained hidden. Chicago hospitals, he said after a moment, they're more about politics than patients. I needed to remember why I became a doctor in the first place. Something in his voice resonated. Disillusionment that mirrored my own. The sense of having been used, having lost something essential in the machinery of institutions and ambitions and other people's failures. I wanted to ask more, wanted to understand what had put that particular tone in his voice. But asking meant sharing, and sharing meant vulnerability. So I stayed silent. That night, I set 2 plates on my table for the first time in 3 years. Just soup. Just practical. We both needed to eat, and it made no sense to take turns. I told myself this as my hands shook slightly arranging the settings. Told myself it meant nothing as I ladled the soup I'd never been good at making. He thanked me. Said it was good. It wasn't. I'd never learned to cook properly. Had survived on simple, functional meals. But he ate like it was a feast. And something about the way he savored even bad soup made my throat tight. This is nice, he said quietly. Eating with someone I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten, too. Forgotten what it felt like to feed someone other than patience. To nourish, rather than just sustain. To share a table and see another person's face across from mine in the lamplight. I lay awake that night wondering if 2 weeks would be long enough. Or if I'd already let him stay too long. Because somewhere in the space between the train derailment and the breech birth and the coffee that appeared without asking, something had shifted. I'd started counting his footsteps. Started noticing when he smiled. Started imagining tomorrow and the day after and seeing him in those imaginings. And that was dangerous. That was how hearts got broken and reputations destroyed. That was how you ended up alone again. But worse, alone after remembering what it felt like not to be. Day 8. I was checking the rancher's splint when the room tilted sideways. I grabbed for the bedpost, but my knees gave out. The last thing I remember thinking was that I couldn't afford to fall. I'd been thinking that for 3 years. Couldn't afford to fail. To need. To trust. To fall. Dr. Hayes caught me before I hit the floor. His arms were steady, and I was too weak to fight when he carried me to my small back room. When did you last sleep? More than 3 hours, he asked, lowering me onto the narrow bed. I'm fine. You're not. His tone was gentle but immovable. You're no good to anyone if you collapse during surgery. Sleep. That's an order. You can't order me. Watch me. Being cared for felt foreign. Frightening. As he checked my pulse, settled a blanket over me. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. The warmth of someone else's concern wrapping around me like the wool blanket. I hated it. Hated needing it. Hated that his hands were gentle and his voice was soft, and I was too tired to maintain my armor. I'll wake you if there's an emergency, he said quietly. Rest. I wanted to argue. Wanted to prove I didn't need protection or care or anyone watching over me. But exhaustion dragged me under before I could form words. I dreamed of Philadelphia. The surgery played out in vivid detail, the patient's face gray with blood loss. The complication I'd noticed too late. My hands moving too slowly while Dr. Morrison barked orders. The moment the patient's heart stopped. The silence after. The blame that followed. The nurse made the critical error, Dr. Morrison had said to the board, his voice heavy with regret. False regret. Performed for an audience. I cannot be held responsible for inadequately trained staff. I'd stood there, voiceless, some part of me believing him, believing I deserved the blame, that my competence wasn't enough, had never been enough. The board had agreed. My reputation shattered. His preserved. That was how power worked. It flowed downward, crushing everything beneath. I woke disoriented 6 hours later. Panic seized me immediately. The patients, infections, medications. Surgeries scheduled. I'd abandoned them. I'd failed again. I staggered from my room, pulse racing, expecting chaos. Found calm instead. Dr. Hayes sat reading to 3 children, his voice low and warm, spinning some tale about a princess and a dragon. Dressings had been changed on every patient. Medications administered. Mrs. Henderson was laughing at something Mary said. The rancher's fever had broken. Everything managed perfectly. Without me, the realization felt like drowning. If he could manage without me, what did that make me? What if he was just tolerating my presence, waiting to tell the town I was incompetent? What if Philadelphia was happening again? Me believing in partnership only to discover I was the weak link being carried along until I became expendable. Everyone's. Stable, Dr. Hayes said. Looking up, he saw my face and stood quickly. Sit down before you fall down. I should have thanked him, should have acknowledged his competence. Instead, I heard myself say coldly, I had it under control. I know you did. His tone was patient, which somehow made it worse. But you don't have to do everything alone. I've managed alone for 3 years. I'm not asking you to need me. He stepped closer, and I saw something in his eyes I couldn't name. Concern, maybe, or pity. I'm asking you to let someone share the load. The last time I'd trusted a doctor, I'd lost everything. My reputation, my position in the hospital, my faith that competence mattered more than politics. I couldn't survive that betrayal twice. 2 weeks, I said, the words coming out harder than intended. That's all we agreed to. Something flickered in his expression. Hurt. Quickly masked, but he just nodded. 2 weeks. That night, I lay in my narrow bed, listening to him move through the clinic. His footsteps were careful, quiet, trying not to wake me. That consideration felt like kindness, and kindness was the most dangerous thing he could offer, because kindness made you hope, made you think maybe this time would be different, maybe this man wouldn't betray you, maybe partnership could be real instead of a pretty lie hiding ugly truth. The blanket smelled like soap and wood smoke, not like the clinic's usual carbolic acid. Like him. I'd noticed his smell. God. When had I started noticing his smell? I pulled the blanket higher and tried not to think about what it meant that I'd fallen asleep feeling safe in his care. Tried not to think about the fact that 2 weeks now sounded too short instead of blessedly temporary. Hope was just another word for eventual disappointment. I'd learned that lesson. I wouldn't forget it again. Day 10 brought infection. The rancher's compound fracture, the one Dr. Hayes had set so carefully that first night showed red streaks. Spreading up his arm, fever spiked. The flesh around the break turned hot and swollen. Without intervention, he'd lose the arm, maybe his life. We need to re-break and reset, Dr. Hayes said, examining the wound. Clean out the infection before it reaches bone. High-risk surgery. 2-person operation. The kind that went wrong in Philadelphia. My pulse kicked up, palms going slick. This was exactly how it had happened before. A complex surgery, a doctor who trusted me, and then everything spiraling into failure and blame. "I need you on this," Dr. Hayes continued, looking at me directly. "I can't do it alone. Your hands are steadier than mine for the delicate work." I heard the words beneath the words. "I trust you. Equal partner, not assistant. What if I fail?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Then we fail together." His tone was matter-of-fact, not reassuring, just honest. "But you won't. You're the best nurse I've ever worked with." We set up the surgery in silence. Instruments laid out. Carbolic acid for sterilization, laudanum for the rancher, who was half delirious with fever. My hands shook as I prepared the scalpels. This was it. This was where partnership revealed itself as illusion, where competent hands made critical errors and doctors shifted blame to protect themselves. The surgery began. Dr. Hayes's voice was calm, clear. "Scalpel." I passed it. "Clamp the artery here." I moved before thinking, my hands knowing what to do even as my mind screamed warnings. We worked in tandem, and despite my fear, the rhythm felt right. His hands and mine, moving like we'd done this 1,000 times, like we'd been partners for years instead of days. "Beautiful work," he murmured as I tied off a bleeder. Not patronizing, just acknowledgement. Then bleeding. Unexpected. Arterial. Pulsing red across the surgical field. I had seconds to clamp it, or the rancher died. My mind whited out completely. Philadelphia. Dr. Morrison shouting. Blood everywhere. Too much blood. My hands frozen. The patient's heart stopping. The board hearing. The nurse made the critical error. My silence. My shame. My failure. "You know what to do." Dr. Hayes's voice cut through the panic, steady as stone. "I'm right here. Not commanding, not blaming. Just present." My hands moved. Found the artery. Clamped. The bleeding stopped. "Good." Dr. Hayes said quietly. "Very good." We finished the surgery together. Cleaned the infection. Reset the bone. Stitched everything closed with tiny, precise sutures. When we finally stepped back, the rancher's pulse was strong. Fever already dropping. My hands were shaking now, adrenaline fading. I turned away so Dr. Hayes wouldn't see. "You saved his life," he said from behind me. I couldn't say what I was thinking that I'd frozen. That without his voice, I would have failed. That 3 years hadn't healed the wound Philadelphia left. Instead, I heard myself correct, "We saved his life." The truth surprised me. Not deflection, actual truth. We had together. Partnership not as weakness, but as strength. We washed our hands side by side at the basin. Our movements mirrored each other. Soap, water, the methodical scrubbing away of blood. When had that happened? When had his rhythms become mine? He touched my shoulder briefly as we left the surgery room, just a gesture of partnership. Colleague to colleague. But I felt it all the way through. Felt the weight of 3 years of isolation lift just slightly. And that terrified me more than the surgery had. Because now I knew what I'd been missing. Now I knew what I'd lose when he left. And day 10 meant only 4 days remained of the 2 weeks we'd agreed to. 4 days until he walked away, and I returned to silence and solitude and the safety of needing no one. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like grief. Day 12. 2 days left. I woke to sunlight, and the sound of Dr. Hayes making coffee in the main room. The smell drifted through my door, that particular scent that meant he was awake, meant the day was beginning, meant I wasn't alone. I lay in bed cataloging everything that had changed. 2 coffee cups on the shelf now, sitting side by side, his coat on the hook by mine. The sound of his voice humming while he worked. The way the clinic felt less like a fortress and more like something else. Something I was afraid to name. I'd gotten used to him. And that was unforgivable. Most of the train derailment patients had healed enough to go home. The crisis was ending. In 2 days, Dr. Hayes would pack his medical bag and leave, and I'd return to the life I'd built. Solitary, safe, sufficient. The thought sat in my chest like a stone. Mrs. Henderson brought it to a head that afternoon. "This town is lucky to have both of you," she said as we changed her bandages. "Hope you're planning to stay, Dr. Hayes. We need good medical care out here. Both of you." As if he belonged here. As if this was permanent. Panic rose in my throat, sharp and choking. After Mrs. Henderson dozed off, I turned to Dr. Hayes, forcing my voice cold. "The 2 weeks are almost up." He went still. "I'm aware." I pushed harder, building the wall higher. "This town doesn't need 2 medical professionals. I've managed fine alone." Each word was a lie. Each lie was armor, protection against the inevitable moment when he left, or worse, when he stayed, and then betrayed me like Dr. Morrison had. "What if I wanted to stay?" Dr. Hayes asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us. I could have said yes, could have admitted I wanted him to. That somewhere between the train derailment and the breech birth and the infected surgery and the coffee, that appeared without asking, I'd fallen in love with him. Instead, I said, this arrangement was temporary. I watched hurt cross his face, saw him absorb it, process it, mask it with professional courtesy. Of course, I'll start making arrangements to leave. He walked away, and I stood there, having won, having protected myself, having ensured I'd never be vulnerable to betrayal again. It felt like losing everything. I couldn't sleep that night. Paced my small room, watching lamplight spill from the main clinic where Dr. Hayes sat packing his medical bag. Methodical. Careful. Removing all trace of himself from the space he'd occupied. I looked at my table. 2 plates still sitting there. 2 chairs. The second cup waiting for morning coffee that wouldn't come. The truth I'd been avoiding crashed over me. I wasn't pushing him away because I didn't need him. I was pushing him away because I did. Because need meant vulnerability. Because everyone I'd ever needed had either left or betrayed me. Because it was easier to be alone than to risk that pain again. Dr. Morrison had courted me too. Had worked beside me, called me brilliant, made me believe in partnership, and then sacrificed me without hesitation when it served him. How was this different? How did I know Garrett wouldn't do the same? I couldn't. Trust was a leap into darkness, hoping someone would catch you. And I'd already fallen once, hit the ground hard enough to shatter. But standing at my window watching dawn break on day 13, our last full day together, I understood something. The bravest thing wasn't protecting yourself. The bravest thing was trusting again after betrayal. Choosing vulnerability even when you knew it could destroy you. Opening your heart even after it had been broken. Mama used to say that. I'd thought it was foolishness. Now I understood it was courage. Dr. Hayes would leave tomorrow. The clinic would be quiet again. I'd have my solitude back, my safety, my walls everything I'd convinced myself I wanted. Everything except him. Everything except the life I was too afraid to choose. I stood at my window as light spread across the prairie, and I made a decision. I could let fear win. Could let Philadelphia define the rest of my life. Could die safe and alone and protect my heart by never using it. Or I could be brave. Could choose trust, even knowing it might fail. Could risk everything for the chance at something real. The choice was mine. It had always been mine. I found him at dawn, packing his medical bag in the pale morning light. My heart lurched. I almost turned away. Almost let safety and fear and 3 years of careful walls keep me silent. But my feet carried me forward anyway. Dr. Hayes, my voice caught. Started again. Garrett. He turned, surprise crossing his face. I'd never used his first name before. I need to tell you something. About Philadelphia. I made myself say it. All of it. The surgery in full detail, the patient who came in with internal bleeding. The complication I'd caught, but not quickly enough. The desperate minutes trying to keep him alive while Dr. Morrison barked orders. The moment the patient's heart stopped. The silence after. Thick with blame and failure. Dr. Morrison told the board I'd made the critical error. My voice shook, but I kept going. That I was inadequately trained. That he couldn't be held responsible for his staff's incompetence, and I believed him. I let him destroy me because part of me thought he was right. Garrett's expression didn't change, just listened with that complete attention he gave everything. I came west, not just to prove I could manage alone. I continued, but to prove I didn't need anyone. Because needing someone, trusting someone had cost me everything. My reputation, my position, my faith that being good at my work mattered. Tears were sliding down my face now. I didn't try to stop them. I've spent 3 years building walls, convincing myself that independence meant strength, that being alone was safe, that not needing anyone meant I couldn't be hurt again. I stepped closer, making myself meet his eyes. But these 2 weeks, you showed me something different. Partnership doesn't make me weak. Trust isn't naive if it's given to someone worthy. And you, my voice broke. You're worthy of it. I took a shaking breath. This town does need 2 medical professionals. These people deserve more than 1 exhausted nurse covering 500 miles alone. But more than that, I don't want to do this alone anymore. Not because I can't, but because working beside you reminded me why I became a nurse. To heal. To help. And sometimes healing means accepting help yourself. The words were coming faster now. 3 years of isolation breaking open. If you meant it about wanting to stay, I'm asking you to. Not as my assistant. As my partner. Equal. In the practice, and I reached for his hand. Felt his fingers close around mine. In my life, if you'll have me. The room was silent except for our breathing. Then Garrett set down his medical bag and took both my hands in his. I was running away when I got on that train, he said quietly. From a medical system in Chicago that valued money over patience, politics over healing. From a life that felt meaningless. I'd spent 5 years watching good medicine get buried under hospital bureaucracy and doctors more concerned with status than saving lives. He touched my face gently. And then a train derailment brought me to a clinic where a stubborn, brilliant nurse reminded me what medicine is supposed to be, what partnership looks like, what love feels like. My breath caught. I've wanted to stay since the moment we delivered that baby together and you said we. He continued. I've been falling in love with you for 2 weeks, watching you care for everyone but yourself, wanting to be the person you'd let care for you. terrified you'd never trust me enough to try. I'm letting you. The words came out steady despite my shaking hands. I'm choosing this. Choosing us. Choosing to be brave enough to trust again. He kissed me then. Gentle. Tentative. Both of us shaking with the enormity of it. The beginning of something terrifying and wonderful. When we pulled apart, I walked to my cabinet with deliberate steps, took down a second plate, a second cup, pulled out the second chair I'd stored in the corner, set them all out on the table, permanent, chosen. Stay for breakfast, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Stay for all of it. Yes, he answered. Just that. Yes. We stood in my clinic. Our clinic, now holding each other as day 13 dawned outside. The day I'd thought he'd leave. The day I chose to ask him to stay instead. And I realized that was the difference. I wasn't being rescued. Wasn't giving up my independence or surrendering my hard-won strength. I was choosing partnership. Choosing love. Choosing vulnerability as an act of courage. Not weakness. That made all the difference. Every step toward him had felt like moving against a current. Every word I'd spoken had felt like stepping off a cliff. But standing in his arms, I understood love was supposed to be a risk worth taking. Trust was supposed to feel dangerous because it mattered so deeply. I'd spent 3 years protecting myself. 3 years believing safety meant solitude. 3 years running from the possibility of being hurt again. It had taken a Christmas Eve disaster and a doctor who fell from the sky to teach me that the bravest thing I could do was stop running and choose to stay. Spring came to Montana Territory in 1884 with the gentleness of a promise kept. 6 months had passed since that Christmas Eve. 6 months since I'd opened my locked door and let in more than just injured patients. 6 months since I'd chosen courage over fear. Our clinic had expanded. 6 beds now instead of 4. A proper surgery room with good light and clean instruments arranged just so. A sign out front read, Hayes and Thornton Medical Practice in equal letters. Equal billing. Equal partnership. The townspeople had gotten used to seeing us together. The way we moved through the clinic in synchronized rhythm. The way we challenged each other, arguing good-naturedly about treatments. Debating approaches. Listening and respecting even in disagreement. They saw something I was still learning to accept, that partnership made both of us stronger. Not weaker. I smiled now, laughed occasionally. Still competent. Still professional. But warmer. More human. The walls I'd maintained for 3 years had come down brick by brick. And what I'd found underneath wasn't weakness. It was strength I'd forgotten I possessed. Garrett brought me coffee every morning still. That small ritual had become sacred, his hands passing the cup, my fingers brushing his. The moment of connection before the day's work began. Thank you, I said each time, and meant it. Meant the gratitude for more than just coffee, for partnership, for patience, for seeing through my walls to the woman underneath and choosing to stay anyway. A rider arrived that April morning, breathless and urgent. Difficult childbirth 20 miles out. Mrs. Thompson, the rider's wife, laboring too long with the baby refusing to come. In the old days, I would have gone alone. Would have carried that weight solo. Believing asking for help meant admitting failure. I'll get the wagon, Garrett said. Already moving? We rode together through spring sunshine, prairie grass greening after winter's grip. His hand found mine on the wagon seat, and I laced our fingers together without hesitation. The birth was difficult. Breech presentation, just like Mrs. Peterson that Christmas Eve. But this time, working together felt natural instead of terrifying. My knowledge directing. Garrett's hands where mine couldn't reach. Our combined strength and skill and hard-won trust. When the baby finally slipped free and cried that first fierce sound of life, I looked across the blood and effort and saw Garrett's face. Saw him looking back at me with love and respect and partnership written in every line. "We make a good team," he said quietly. "We do." I agreed. We drove home as evening painted the sky gold and pink. I thought about that Christmas Eve. 60 injured people, 4 beds, 1 overwhelmed nurse trying to save everyone alone. I'd thought it was the worst thing that could happen. Instead, it had brought me the best thing. A partner who saw through my armor, who taught me that healing went both ways, who showed me that accepting help wasn't weakness but wisdom. I would have tried to save everyone alone that night, would have burned myself out trying, would have believed that needing no one made me strong. Now I knew better. Strength wasn't refusing help. It was knowing when to ask for it. Independence wasn't isolation. It was choosing your partnerships wisely and building something together that neither could build alone. Our clinic sat waiting as we pulled up. 2 names on the sign, 2 coats on the hooks, 2 plates on the table inside. A life we'd built on trust and respect and the courage to let someone in. "Home," Garrett said, helping me down from the wagon. "Home," I echoed, and meant it with my whole heart. That evening, I locked the clinic door, but not my heart. Garrett waited on the porch, and when he held out his hand, I took it without hesitation, without fear, without the walls I'd maintained for so long. "Ready?" he asked. I looked at him, this man who'd fallen into my life on the worst night and become the best thing in it. This partner who'd shown me that trust could be real if you were brave enough to give it. "I am," I said. I'd come west to prove I could manage alone. I'd learned something better. I didn't have to. None of us did. We weren't meant for isolation. We were meant for connection, for partnership, for the terrifying joy of letting someone see us completely and choosing to stay. I used to think that needing no one made me strong, that independence was the highest achievement a woman could reach. I was wrong. Real strength was opening your heart after it had been broken. Real courage was trusting again after betrayal. Real wisdom was understanding that we're stronger together than we ever could be alone. Some lessons come easy. Some come wrapped in disaster and blood and 60 injured people arriving in 1 hour on Christmas Eve. Some come in the form of a doctor with steady hands and gentle eyes who asks instead of commands, who partners instead of dominates, who sees you, really sees you, and chooses to stay. I'd spent 3 years running from trust. It took a Christmas Eve disaster to teach me that the bravest thing I could do was stop running and choose to stay.